You know, over the last number of years, as I've listened to many people and as I've prayed for many people and ministered to many people, I've come to the conclusion that humanity's greatest challenge, our greatest obstacle, well, other than sin, our greatest challenge, our greatest enemy is fear. It's fear. Even many Christians battle with so many fears, and it's just not right. It's just not what Jesus died for, right? Fear can be experienced in many ways. Fear can be, oh, can I have my clicker there, Alyssa? Thank you so much. I knew I was something missing in my hand. Thank you. Our problem is fear. Fear can be experienced in many ways. We can have a fear of flying. We can have a fear of driving. We can have a fear of heights. We can have a fear of closed spaces. We can have a fear of disclosure, of being honest with people. We can have a fear of commitment. We have a fear of rejection, a fear of being abandoned, a fear of sharing our faith with other people, a fear of speaking in public, a fear of death, a fear of the unknown, a fear of just so many things. Fear. But whatever the issue is, what our real problem is, or what we're really fearing or expecting, is pain. The possibility that a circumstance or event is going to cause us pain in some form or other. We're afraid of pain. We're afraid that something is going to result in us being hurt, whether humiliated, emotional pain, or whether physically experience pain, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, relationally. We're afraid we're going to experience pain. So what is fear? Just so we really get a good handle on this. Fear is an unpleasant and often strong emotion caused by anticipation or awareness of danger. Danger or experience that we feel is a danger to our emotions, our physical being, our mental being, okay? What it means is that fear is a distressing emotion that's stirred by a feeling of impending danger, of evil, of pain, of some harm to us, right? Mind, will, or emotions, physically, spiritually, relationally, whatever. Whether that fear is real or imagined, whether that pain is real or imagined, there's fear, okay? Fear is such a powerful emotion in our lives that it can overrule all of our other emotions. You know that? No matter if it's love or joy or commitment, fear will override any emotion in our lives. It will override our logic. It will override our values. It will override our faith. It will override our beliefs, our priorities. Fear will just put a blanket on any of those things and override them. And no matter how strong-willed we are, and no matter how courageous we are in our lives, we can become entangled in this web of our own fears and just instantly overcome. Fear comes on us so quickly, and it freezes us. It trips us up. In one sense, fear is an illusion, right? Because it's not physical. Fear is not a physical reality. It doesn't exist in the physical world. It's not tangible. We can't touch it. We can't smell it. It's not visible. We can't see fear. But in another sense, fear is probably the realest thing we have because it exists strongly in our minds, in our spirits, in our emotions. It's very real to us, and it manifests itself through our actions, our responses, right? Fear. Fear causes damaging behavior. Fear wars and rages inside of us, in our minds and our emotions, and it causes us to either make poor decisions, right? Out of fear, we make really dumb decisions, and it results in desperation or frustration or anger, or it freezes us so we don't react at all. We just get stuck. right? We just get absolutely stuck. In this series, I want to give you 8 keys that become a process of 8 steps to overcoming fear. Tested in my own life. It doesn't mean I'm fearless yet, but it means I've overcome so many of the fears I used to have as I've applied these 8 steps consistently in my own life. And so what I'm about to share with you is not theology as such. It's not theory. It's practical things I've worked through in my own life. But today, before I get into those 8 steps, and that's why I call this lesson 0, I want to help you to understand the consequences. 10 consequences of fear. 10 things it will do. Those 10 ways it will damage our lives. Because I want us to be motivated to say, I have to break free of fear. I have to apply these steps because I want to be fearless. I want to be fearless. So why do we need to deal with fear? Why do we need to deal with every fear in our lives? Okay. Well, number 1, it damages our ability to be transparent. It damages our ability to let people see who we really are. Here we go. Galatians chapter 3, verse 10. We kind of looked at this a bit last week. Genesis 3:10. Adam answered to God in the garden right after he sinned. He said, I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid. Every other day before that, Adam was not afraid. But after he messed up, after he failed, he said, suddenly I'm afraid because I was naked. For the first time he saw himself as he was in his own eyes with his fallen mindset, with his sin now. And he said, so I hid. I was naked, so I hid. You know, that word afraid appears 206 times in the Bible. And every last time it's always used in a negative context. There are negative implications to the word afraid. It's never used in a positive way, ever, in the Bible. So even though it was God, right? This is God. This is the one that Adam and Eve had fellowship with every day since they were created. Every day in the Garden of Eden. As soon as Adam and Eve sinned, suddenly, because they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and they understood now good and evil, which God never wanted them to be able to do, to understand good and evil. But because they ate of that forbidden fruit, they experienced nakedness. Because of their sin, they experienced nakedness for the very first time. And so they tried to hide from their Creator, the lover of their soul. They tried to hide from the person who knew them the best and loved them the most. They hid from Him. Just think the insanity of that. Hiding from the person that loves me the most. See, that's what fear does. It causes us to hide, to cover up. I was naked, so I was afraid. And so I tried to hide. Because of fear, we're afraid of what people might think of us. We're afraid of people might reject us. We're afraid that people would shun us. We're afraid they might react to us in some negative way. And if they just knew who they were, who we really are, as we truly are, we're afraid they'll just push us away. They'll reject us. And so we put on masks, right? We put on these masks to hide our faults, our fears, our failures. But as I shared last week, if you are wearing a mask and if someone loves you, they're not loving you. They're only loving your mask. And if they reject you, they're not rejecting you. They're only rejecting your mask. And so, so many people go through their whole lives never knowing if people really love them, because they've never been able to present themselves to others the way they truly are. I had a meeting with someone yesterday, and this person said, I'm just so full of fear. I'm so full of fear. No one knows me as I really am. I've never been able to share who I really am because I'm fearful of so many things. God didn't save us to live that way, right? God didn't create us to live that way. Most people, sadly, because of fear, are not even known by their life partner completely. They're not even known by their best friend completely because of fear. Fear keeps us from being known. It keeps us from being known by even those who love us. John chapter 3, verse 20, everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that his deeds will be exposed. Everyone who does evil hates the light because they're afraid of being exposed. They're afraid of their failures becoming known to other people and therefore being rejected or being despised. So they hide in the darkness. Well, here's the sad truth, is that even people that don't do evil, but people that just mess up, people that just experience failure in their life, and they think, right, shame, oh, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? I better hide, because if people knew me as I truly am, they would reject me. And so they also hide in the darkness. People that don't even do any evil, they still hide in the darkness because of their failures, their shame. See, and as long as we're hiding, we'll never be fully known. We'll never be able to say, this person truly knows me, and yet they still love me. And man, what a powerful thought that is. To know that there's someone that loves you in spite of your flaws, your failures. God does. But it's always good to have some people with skin on, right? Some people that have skin on that love us too. Fear damages our transparency. Number 2, fear damages our integrity. Genesis chapter 18, verse 15. Sarah was afraid, so she lied. See, when the angel appeared to Abraham and Sarah and said, guess what? Sarah in her old age, 90 years of old, is going to have a child. And she immediately in disbelief, she laughed. Just a short laugh, but like, ha ha ha, yeah. And immediately the angel said, you just laughed. She goes, oh no, I didn't. Right? She lied. Why? Because she was afraid of how the angel would react to her or judge her, or maybe he would punish her just because she laughed. All she had to say, well, you're right, because this is kind of hard to believe. You know, this is kind of hard to take in. But instead, oh, I didn't laugh. Right? How quickly we lie when we're afraid. How quickly we lie when we become afraid. Sarah lied, and she sacrificed her integrity because of fear. Just simply because of fear. Genesis 26:7. Let's look at Abraham now. We looked at Sarah. What about Abraham? Genesis 26:7. When the men of that place asked Abraham about his wife, because she was so beautiful, and he said, whoa, who's this good-looking girl, right? And he said, she's my sister. Because he was afraid. He was afraid if they found out that he was her husband, they're going to think, well, not for long. She was afraid. Or he was afraid. So he lied. He lied to the king that Sarah was just his sister, because he was afraid of what they might do to him. And so he sacrificed his integrity. He didn't even know how the guy would respond. He just, out of fear, he lied. See, and out of fear, we often respond in a way, like we often lie, we often use deceit. Even if the other person, it would not make any difference to them, but because of fear, we immediately assume it will. See? Look at another, Samuel, 1 Samuel 15:24. Then Saul said to Samuel, this is Saul, the king of Israel, the tall, handsome, like really tall, over 6 feet tall, handsome, powerful, strong, king of the whole nation of Israel. He said to Samuel, I've sinned. How? I've violated the Lord's commands and your instructions. Why? Why, Samuel? Or why, Saul? Why'd you do that? Because I was afraid of the people. I was afraid of the people, and so I gave in to them. He lied to his subjects. He's the king. And, he could just say, off with their heads, right? And that would be the end of it. He was afraid of those who were under him. He was afraid of his subjects because he was afraid they might respond to him, reject him, or whatever, right? He sacrificed his integrity because of the fear of the people that he ruled over. See, no matter how much power or authority or wisdom or money a person has, their greatest weakness is often fear. And that fear often becomes their downfall, because they'll sacrifice their integrity because of fear. Another way that fear damages us. Fear can damage our physical health. Fear can damage our physical health. Ezekiel 27:35. They shuddered with horror, and their faces are distorted with fear. See, when you become afraid, your muscles in your face tense up. And a person who constantly lives with fear, their muscles are so used to tensing up, it will distort their faces. They will live with a constant distortion of their face because of fear. Job 4:14, fear and trembling seized me and made all my bones shake. Psalm 32 verse 3, when I kept silent, my bones wasted, because he was afraid. He said, my bones started wasting away through all of my groaning all day long. Still coming. Psalm 42 verse 10, my bones suffer mortal agony as my foes taunt me. And so he became afraid, and his bones started to affect his whole body. See, fear is actually a major cause of bone diseases. How? Because fear disrupts the functioning, believe it or not, fear disrupts the functioning of our kidneys. And our kidneys affect the health of our bones. And so when you have fear, your kidneys misfunction, and somehow you're, like, I don't understand, like, I'm not, you know me, I don't know anything about medical stuff, but I read in a medical magazine that fear affects our kidneys, which affects our bones. Proverbs 1:33, whoever listens to me will live in safety and be at ease without fear of harm. Whoever obeys the Lord, listens to the Lord, and obeys him will be at ease. Will be at ease. So when we don't struggle with fear, our lives will be at ease. If we do struggle with fear, our lives will not be at ease. We'll experience dis-ease. Dis-ease. Disease. That's what disease is. It's lack of ease in your physical body. Either lack of ease in your chemical systems, your neurological systems, your glandular systems, your nervous systems, whatever. That's what disease is. And it affects your body. Henry Wright, do I have that here? Yeah. Henry Wright wrote a book called A More Excellent Way. 500-page book that exposes many of our health problems that we face, which are mostly due to fear, anxiety, worry, and unforgiveness. I believe every household should have a copy of that book, A More Excellent Way. You can get it online, hard copy or digital copy. Whenever someone's sick in my family, I look in that book and I see what it says, and we try to deal with the emotional roots of sickness. The good news is that where did he go? Jacques, there is Jacques. Wave at me, Jacques. Yeah. Jacques has translated that whole 500-page book, Jacques and Mary, into French, and it's going to be published probably June, about June, right? And it'll be available to the whole French world, okay? So there's no excuse for us not, Spanish, well, maybe not French, but French and English, every household can have, and I tell you, it's worth it. It is so worth it. If it was $100, it would still be worth it. But it's not $100. It's about $30 to $45 somewhere in there, depending on the copy. Anyway, all that to say, fear affects our emotional health. I'm sorry, our physical health. Fear affects our physical health. Another thing that fear does. Are you getting motivated to deal with fear? Hopefully. Number 4, fear damages our spiritual sight, our spiritual perception. Matthew 14:26, when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, remember Jesus was out walking on the lake in the middle of the storm, and they said they were terrified. Do we understand terrified is fear, right? They were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. See, here's the disciples out on the Sea of Galilee in a boat. Storm comes up, and Jesus comes out to them walking on the water to deliver them from the storm, to help them out. And he performs this miracle. He's of walking on the water. Why? To build up the disciples' faith. To see how powerful Jesus was. That he had power over all the elements. But because they were afraid, they couldn't even recognize Jesus when he came to them. Fear distorted their ability to see what Jesus was doing there on the lake. And so often, I've seen Christians praying for God to help them, and then when God brings an answer to the prayers, because of fear, they don't recognize the answer being from God, because their fear clouds their spiritual sight, and because it distorts their spiritual sight, and they can't even recognize the answer that God brings them. That's how deceptive, how destructive, how distorting fear is. I was in a prayer meeting recently, the last couple of weeks I was in a prayer meeting, and these Christians are praying for God to help them. Actually, to help this one woman. And it turns out God had spoken to this woman, right? She'd asked for help. God had spoken to her, but because of the fear-based perception of the group that were praying for her, they could not perceive that answer to prayer was from God. And so they bound that thing, they cursed that thing, they nullified that answer to prayer. They totally rejected what God had said because they couldn't perceive that it was from God because of their fear. Fear damaged their spiritual sight. That can't be Jesus. Well, why not? Try asking for open eyes. Try to have fear distorts our sight. And we can't see clearly what God's trying to say to us. What he's trying to speak to us. The solution he's bringing to us because of our fear. It distorts our ability to see what God's doing. Another way fear damages our lives. Fear damages our ability to obey God. It just stops us from obeying God. Luke chapter 174. Rescue us from the hands of our enemies and enable us to serve him without fear. Help us to serve him by getting rid of the fear. If you would get rid of the fear, God will be able to serve you. Fear keeps us from serving God, from obeying God. See, God asks us to step out in faith, but we don't because of fear. God asks us to telephone someone and encourage them, but because of fear, we don't. God asks us to get involved in a church ministry, and we go, oh man, no way I could do that, right? Out of fear, we don't. God asks us to share our faith with someone, but out of fear, we don't. God asks us to give a prophetic word, but out of fear, we don't. Right? And we're saying, oh, I wish God would speak to me. Man, God's speaking to you so much, but because of fear, you're not doing anything with what he's showing you, revealing to you, saying to you, directing you, guiding you. See, fear freezes us. It's like the person that gets up on the diving board, they're ready to go, and they get to the top, and they look down, and suddenly they freeze. Like, all you have to do is jump. Like, you don't even have to dive if you don't want to. Just jump. But fear stops them, right? It freezes them. Fear overcomes our thinking and our feeling and our doing, and it causes us to become stuck in our lives. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 6, do what is right and do not give way to fear. Meaning that if you do give way to fear, you won't do what is right. Fear stops us from doing right, even when we are completely convinced that it's the right thing to do. Even when we're completely convinced that it's the will of God. God, show me your will. I know your will. Oh, but I'm afraid. And we don't do it. Matthew 1:20. But after Joseph, remember this is Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary says, hey, I'm pregnant. Joseph had considered this. An angel of the Lord appeared to him. And remember, Joseph was about to divorce her. And because he's a righteous man, he's going to put her away quietly, right? He's not going to expose her, which was his right, which was what was expected by the Jewish system. He said, no, I am going to divorce her because she's been unfaithful to me, but I'm going to do it quietly. I'm going to be a righteous man and do it the right way. An angel appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is by the Holy Spirit. See, Joseph loved Mary. He absolutely loved Mary. He wanted to marry Mary. But he knew what the expectations of the Jewish leaders were. He knew that they expected him to divorce her and to have her publicly shamed and perhaps even stoned, right? But see, Joseph was a righteous man. And because he was a righteous man, he decided, I'm going to quietly divorce Mary to protect her from the shame, and I'm going to hide her away somewhere, send her off. But see, that's not what God wanted. Have you ever righteously disobeyed God? Disobeying what God told you to do because we felt we were disobeying for noble reasons. Right? I know you want me to do this, God, but I think I'll do this instead because it's the right thing to do. It's righteous, it's noble, it's good. See, it's one thing to unrighteously disobey God. Isn't it so much better to righteously disobey God? Right? Joseph was a gentleman. So he was planning to righteously disobey God. To protect her reputation. And God had to get in front of Joseph's righteous disobedience by sending an angel to him in a dream and saying, Joseph, don't give way to fear. Do not give in to fear. Don't allow fear to stop you from doing what is the right thing in my will, not the right thing in your own mind. Right? See, sometimes the consequences of disobedience due to fear is not only life-changing, but it can be world-changing. Because if Joseph had disobeyed God, what would have happened to Mary? She would have been stoned, probably. And who knows what would have happened as a result. See, you never know the consequences or the fruit that can come in obeying God. Like that one young man that saw this little kid, teenager, and said, I think I'll witness to that guy. I'll overcome my fear. And we had a Billy Graham because of that. Millions were saved because one guy, I think it was a salesman or something, decided to witness to this little kid. You never know how many lives. You never know if it's going to affect the whole world. Like, just get rid of the fear and say yes to God. Fear always damages our ability to obey God. Another thing fear does, we're halfway there. Fear damages our external circumstances. Fear, what do I mean by this? Well, look at this. Job, what I feared has come upon me. What I feared has actually happened to me. What I dreaded has happened to me. In the King James, it says, what I feared the most, what I dreaded, what I feared the very most is the very thing that has come into my life and happened to me. See, if you remember the story, Job was a very righteous man, right? He was incredibly righteous. He was very successful. He was very prosperous. But suddenly he was robbed of all of his oxen and his donkeys and his cattle. All of his sheep were burned alive. Yeah, all of his servants were killed by raiders. All of his sons and daughters died when their house collapsed because of a tornado that came through or some sort of whirlwind that came through. And then all of the skin on his body broke out with boils, these painful sores. And what was Job's confession? He didn't say, oh man, the devil's really out to get me. Because I hear that one a lot, right? And he didn't say, why is God punishing me? Hear that one a lot too, right? What did he confess? He said, what I feared has come upon me. What I feared the most has somehow caused an opening in my life so that I could be afflicted by the enemy. That's what he's saying. Because of fear, there was this opening in my life. And Satan was allowed to come in and torment me. If you read the rest of the story, you'll see that's exactly what happened. See, I know we don't like to think about it. I know it's not a nice thought, but it's often our fears that open the door to the torment of Satan. Right? It's often our fears that open the door to allow torment into our lives. Because of fear, our life becomes open to attack. 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 5. Man, if you can get this one. For when we came into Macedonia, this is Paul talking, we and his team, his missionary team, this body of ours had no rest. But we were harassed at every turn. Okay, a lot. And so what happened? Conflicts on the outside, fears within. Do you get this? Fear in, conflict without. Fears within, conflict without. What we fear internally can become our experience externally. As Bill Johnson said it, our internal reality becomes our external reality. Okay? If our life is full of fear, eventually the environment around us becomes the physical manifestation of those fears. If we constantly fear that our children are going to make poor choices in their lives, eventually they're going to make poor choices in their lives because of our fear. If we constantly fear that our spouse is going to leave us, good chance one day our spouse is going to leave us because we change the atmosphere around us by what's going on inside of us. If we constantly fear that we will contract a life-threatening illness, there's a really good chance we're going to contract a life-threatening illness because of fear. What I feared has come upon me. Fear damages our external circumstances. Number 7, fear damages our freedom. Fear damages our freedom. Psalm 55, 4-7. My heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death assail me. Fear and trembling have beset me. Horror has overwhelmed me. And so what does he think? Well, I'm just going to stand up and fight this thing and, claim it in Jesus' name. No. Oh, that I had the wings of a dove. I would fly away and be at rest. I would flee far away and stay in the desert. What is he saying? Because of fear, David spent his time daydreaming about running away and hiding. Do you understand? You can't fight your challenges if you're thinking all the time about running away. Right? Rather than spend his time praying to God and asking for God's guidance or for deliverance, rather than planning a strategy to deal with his problems, his mind was full of thoughts. Oh, man, where can I run to? Where can I run to? I just need to get away. Just escape from my problems. Hide as far away as I can from these problems. And he's thinking, oh, I could run and stay in the desert. Oh, wow, smart man, right? I'm going to run away from these circumstances into the desert with no water, no vegetation, really hot, probably going to burn my skin. Yeah, it's like scorpions, yeah. Well, that'll be better, won't it, right? Fear does that. Because of fear, people physically run away from marriages, from jobs, from other challenges in life. Because of fear, people run away emotionally through fantasy, through pornography. They run away from their problems. Because of fear, people run away chemically through drug abuse, through alcoholism. It's all fear-based. Fear causes us to retreat into a place where we feel safe, only to discover that safe place is actually our prison. Proverbs 29:25. Fear of man will prove to be a snare, a trap. But whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. Whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe, right? They got 3 more points here. Fear of man becomes a bondage, a trap, a prison for us. Fear always damages, right? Fear always limits. Fear always hinders. Fear always puts us into a bondage. Always. And fear will always cause us to lose our freedom. Jesus died to set us free. Fear will make sure we're never free. Hebrews 12:14 and 15. Jesus shared in their humanity so that by his death he might destroy him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear. Fear is slavery. Jesus died to set us free from slavery, meaning he died to set us free from fear. See, fear is not just a sickly or uneasy feeling. Fear is a cruel master. Fear is a prison guard. Fear causes us to become slaves. Fear always damages our freedom. Number 8. Isaiah 21:4. Fear damages our faith. Isaiah 21:4. My heart falters. Fear makes me tremble. The twilight I long for has become a horror to me. Twilight meaning it was time to go to bed, right, and rest. Instead, it's a scary time. I'm afraid that I won't even make it at the end of the day. It's such a scary day for me, right? Fear causes my heart to falter. It causes me to lose my courage. It weakens me. It causes me to waver, and I become hindered in my ability to step out in faith for God. Matthew 8:26, Jesus replied, "You have little faith. Why are you so afraid? Because you're afraid, you're of little faith." Why the disciples, they were out in the boat, right, in the middle of the storm. Why did they have so little of faith? Because they were afraid. Little fear, big faith. Big fear, little faith. Fear shrinks, minimizes, smothers our faith. Fear and faith are enemies of each other. Matthew 14:30. But when Peter saw the wind, remember, he's out there performing a miracle. He's out there walking on water. What a man of faith. For a minute. When he saw the wind, he was afraid. And because he was afraid, he began to sink. Man, how many in this room would like to walk on water? I want to walk on water before I die. Right? But all it takes is a little bit of fear, and you're going to sink. They're afraid. Peter was afraid. He began to sink. You know, as soon as he saw the wind, his fear totally erased his miraculous faith. And he started to sink. See, it is so tragic to never step out in faith because of fear. But you know what? To me, it's just as tragic, or maybe even more tragic, to step out in faith and let fear come in and eradicate the miracle you were seeing God do in your life. To have a miracle and then lose it because of fear. Matthew 25:25. So I was afraid. This is the parable of talents, right? The one that was given 1 talent. I was afraid, and I went out and I hid your talent in the ground. Why'd you hide my talent in the ground? Because I was afraid. I was afraid. You know, yeah, okay, it was only 1 talent, but it was a valuable talent because it was given by a powerful, loving, and benevolent master to him. And he said, this is free. Here's a talent. Just do something with it and see what kind of interest you can get, what kind of profit you can get from this talent. It was a no-lose situation, but he found a way to lose anyway. But it was a no-lose situation. Here's a talent, it's free. Just put my money to work and see what you can get. He was so afraid of failing that he didn't even try to invest that talent. And the master said later, if you hadn't invested, at least there would be some guaranteed interest. Guaranteed interest. But he's afraid to even do that. And so instead he threw the talent, he buried it in the ground where it started to tarnish, it began to rust, and it produced no fruit. Why? Because of fear. Because of fear of failure. The servant was afraid his investment may not live up to his master's expectations, and so instead he did nothing with it. Fear always damages our faith. Always. 2 to go. Fear damages our ability to love. Fear damages our ability to love. 1 John 4:18, there is no fear in love. Perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. It has to do with pain, that concern about getting pain. Fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. There's no fear in love because perfect love drives out, just displaces fear. Fear hinders our ability to love and to receive love. Perfect love, God's love, drives out all fear so we can love and be loved. Right? Pretty simple stuff. Okay. Therefore, if we still have fear in our life, then obviously we have not yet experienced the fullness of God's perfect love for us. Right? Ouch, but true. Because God's perfect love should have driven out all that fear out of our lives. It should have displaced all of that fear. And so because His love has not been able to free us from all fear, therefore we're not able to fully love other people or fully be loved by other people. To receive love from God and other people. See, one of the biggest hindrances in marriage, in any relationship, is fear. Because if I open my heart wide to you and I become vulnerable to you and I love you and you reject me, will I be able to recover from the pain I felt in the rejection? Or if I open my heart completely wide to you and I become vulnerable to you and I let you, I'm sorry I said that. I'm sorry, did I say if you reject me? Yeah, if you reject me, I'm going to experience pain. But what if I open up my heart wide to you and I love you and you don't accept my love? Or you take your love back from me, am I going to recover from that pain? And see, and as long as you have fear in your life, you will not be able to fully love, and you will not be fully able to receive love. And so because of that, most people, one more time for effect, most people never fully open their hearts to others. Like, it's like, I love you. it's... Yeah, that's right, yeah. We never fully open up our love, our heart to our spouse, our children, our friends. And so sadly, most people have never experienced the fullness of love. No wonder we're critical, sarcastic, what's the right word? Tainted, I don't know, bitter, all those words, right? Because we've never been able to fully, like to quote that famous theologian, Tina Turner, what's love got to do with it anyway? Right? But she's right. She said, well, it's just a secondhand emotion. It is if you've never opened up your heart fully and you've never experienced the fullness of love. Some of you have never experienced the fullness of God's love because you haven't even been able to open your heart up fully to God. And then we wonder about God's love. We question God's love. We say, well, it's not such a big deal. Well, you haven't experienced the fullness of God's love then. Fear always damages our ability to love and to be loved. Always. One last thing. You're all singing that song in your head now, I can tell. Yeah, exactly. Fear damages our intimacy with God. Fear damages our intimacy with God. Romans 8:15. For you did not receive a spirit that makes you a slave again to fear, but you received the spirit of sonship, and by him we cry, Abba, Father. God did not give us a spirit of fear. Fear is not from God. Ever, ever, ever is fear from God. Okay. Now, fear does not damage our standing with God. That's the good news. God gave us his spirit of sonship through his Holy Spirit, and our sonship, our standing with God is secure. It is true. It's the real deal. It's the real thing. But fear does damage our intimacy with God, so we question whether it's the real thing. Fear tries to deceive us into coming to God as a slave, as a sinner, as someone who is unworthy, rather than as a son or a daughter, as someone who is a saint, as someone who is completely accepted by God already. It totally distorts our intimacy with God. A spirit of fear will make us feel completely unworthy. It will make us feel completely unacceptable. It will make us feel completely offensive to a living and holy God. That's what fear does. Even though the Bible says, come boldly before the throne of grace, we don't because of fear. A spirit of sonship will make us feel completely worthy, will make us feel completely acceptable and accepted, and make us feel completely pleasing to our loving and living God, our Abba Father. Fear always damages our intimacy with God. We're just starting. I guess that could be my last slide. Yeah. Well, one more. We're just starting this series that I'm calling Fearless. And it is my goal to help each one of you to deal one by one with all your fears. Why? Because of these 10 reasons. Hopefully you're all motivated now when you see the damage that fear can do in our lives. I want to give you these 8 keys, but right now, today, I just want to motivate you to realize how important it is to deal with fear in your life. Fear is such a terrible enemy. Fear damages our transparency to one another. Fear damages our integrity, our ability to be honest and live by our values. It doesn't matter what values you have, fear will rob you of the ability to live by them. Fear damages our physical health. Fear damages our spiritual sight, our able to perceive. into the spiritual realities around us. Fear damages our ability to obey God. It freezes us. Fear damages our external circumstances. It changes things around us and causes all sorts of torment and just crazy stuff in our lives. Fear damages our freedom, our ability to live as free people, even though Jesus died for that. Fear damages our faith, our ability to step out when God says to step out. Fear damages our ability to love and be loved. That's a biggie. That's a real biggie. God, does my wife really know me? Does she really know who I am? I still remember Kathy and I were just dating, and we were in London, Ontario, walking along, probably 10:30 at night along the side of the Thames River in London, Ontario, walking hand in hand. I'm feeling in heaven already. Like, I'm just in bliss. I'm this young 20, whatever, 3-year-old guy, and God, life is so wonderful. And I'm talking and feeling so good about what a great guy I am. And all of a sudden, Kathy spins me around and grabs my shirt and grabs me and starts shaking. When are you going to tell me who you really are? Well, hello there, I'm David. But that's not what she meant, was it? My relationships were a mile wide and an inch deep. Because I was so afraid to let people know who I really was, because I was afraid I would be rejected. I was afraid I would be criticized. I was afraid I'd receive pain. I was afraid you would abandon me. I was afraid you'd judge me. And so I was such a loving guy, man. Everybody thought, man, is Dave ever a loving guy? He's such a good listener. And they went, oh, but he never speaks. Because I was so afraid you might get to know who I really was. And this was the girl I was going to marry. I couldn't even tell her. Yeah. Thank God she's like a hound. She pursued me. She pursued my heart. She didn't pursue me. I was there. I was in love. I was in googly eyes in love with her. But she pursued my heart and kept going after it. Fear damages our ability to love and be loved. Fear damages our intimacy with God. There's another person who's pursuing us right now if we'll let him. Let's stand to our feet. I want to pray, and I'd like you to also take these home this week. Would you ask God to help you to really understand how damaging fear really is? Would you ask God to give you a revelation of how damaging fear is? Because if you don't, you will never be motivated to go through these steps and get free of fear. And I can promise you the consequences of having fear in your life are so much greater than the consequence of getting free of fear and experiencing the fullness of the life that God has for you. I didn't quite say that the right way, but hopefully you understood what I said. And number 2, would you ask God to help you begin to see what fears you have? Here's a hint. Next week we deal with the first step of fearless, and that's the F. And the F word is called face your fears. We've got to know what they are. We've got to admit to them. We've got to look at them. We've got to understand why we're reacting the way we do so that we can actually go after those fears, okay? So next week we're going to talk about facing our fears. But can you begin to ask God to show you what fears you really have? Because often we don't realize what fears we're really dealing with. We cover them up with skins, don't we, like Adam and Eve? We distort them. We don't face them as they are. So, Father, in Jesus' name right now, let's do that. Lord, I ask you to help us to really understand how damaging fear is. God, we're tired of being closed to love. We're tired of freezing when you say to step out. We're tired of having life crazy around us. We're tired of being bound up. We're tired of not having a deep relationship with you. We're tired of not being able to let other people know who we really are. We're tired of sacrificing our integrity. We're tired of being sick. We're tired of having our spiritual eyes distorted. We're just tired. Lord, show us the consequences of fear, to understand how great they are so we'll be motivated to change. And number two, God, help us in this next week to start to look, to consider. We're asking for your help, for your revelation, your insight, so that we can see, we can name each fear by name, so we can start to dismantle it and drive it out of our lives. We know it's by your perfect love, but God, as we learn the process, we'll see how we can actually drive it with your love out of our lives. Lord, show us your fears, our fears, Lord God. Reveal to us what they are. We begin to ask today, and through this week, Lord, show us what things we are fearing so we can be free of them. And all God's people said,